Of course, tradition zero is don't get caught. Hi, I'm Matt Stormcrow, geek polymath and local World of Darkness fanatic, and we're going to talk about the traditions from Vampire the Masquerade. The laws and rules that govern, loosely speaking, govern the Camarilla, one of the most powerful sects in the entire World of Darkness and in Vampire the Masquerade. And specifically, what we're going to cover is how these rules are used to control and abuse neonates and keep things in line. They seem reasonable, they seem logical, they seem perfectly fine until you get into the details of how they're used by the princes, the primogen, and everyone else further up the ladder. The purpose of this guide is to give you, as a storyteller, the tools needed to really reflect the abusive and manipulative nature of these rules in the Camarilla, which is not an idealistic political system, or to give you, as the player, the tools to understand exactly why there's such strong opposition to the Camarilla and these fairly straightforward 6 laws. But first off, let's talk about what the traditions are. The traditions were first codified in the Convention of 1493, the founding document of the Camarilla that was hashed out at the Convention of Thorns. But some of the traditions are a reflection of much older laws and even find their precedent in the Book of Nod, the Bible of vampires. These laws, like domain and accounting, are reflected deeply in vampiric culture going back beyond the Dark Ages. But wherever they came from, wherever they find their precedent in, ultimately the Camarilla uses them to screw the neonate. So let's begin. The first tradition. The Masquerade. Thou shalt not reveal thy true nature to those not of the blood. Doing such shall renounce thy claims to the blood. Probably the most straightforward tradition, right? Don't tell people that vampires exist. Do not reveal your nature to a whole bunch of people because, frankly, as the Second Inquisition in V5 has shown, it'll get a bunch of us iced. Right? What could be sinister about that? Fact of the matter is, the first tradition is used as a weapon against other vampires just as frequently as it is earnestly enforced to preserve the existence of vampiric secrecy. Often, what counts as a masquerade breach and what warrants death for a masquerade breach varies widely depending on how well connected the kindred involved is. Whether I'm given the chance to clean up my mess or bury it under the rug will depend on how well liked I am by the powers that be. And every kindred knows this. So all the powers that be let you know that if you step out of line, you can be taken down just with the masquerade breach accusation. Meanwhile, an elder or an ancilla will get plenty of time to utilize their resources, will be able to use blackmail against mortal authorities, and generally sweep everything under the rug. What they do is allowed. What you do is not. Also, heaven forbid that they discover that you revealed your existence to a loved one or to an old classmate who recognized you, or even the most trivial breach of the masquerade, if honed in on by a primogen or another influential kindred, it becomes a powerful tool for blackmail. In fact, breaches of the masquerade are more likely to be used as blackmail than actually covered up. Then again, the tradition says nothing about if you fix the problem, it goes away. It simply says, you breached the masquerade, sorry. That said, the masquerade is generally agreed upon by all sects as being a good idea. No one runs around on national television saying vampires exist. It's just in the Camarilla, with it being an ironclad law, especially with the second masquerade, banning the use of electronics for the same purpose, it tends to be abused more than just used as a rule of thumb. But hey, it's only going to get worse from here, kids. Let's talk about the second tradition, domain. Thy domain is thy own concern. All others owe thee respect while in it. None may challenge thy word in thy domain. Okay, but who gets domain? Oh, right, the elder, aka the prince. You see, in the Camarilla, the entire city is assumed to be the domain of the city's prince, though the prince can delegate and grant subdomains within the city districts, prime hunting grounds to other vampires, thus giving them gifts and little snacks for being good servants or being loyal or supporting them politically. This creates a complex urban labyrinth which neonates have to navigate of where they can feed, what responsibilities they have, and that entire thing about they owe you respect in it means that you need to kowtow to whoever whose domain you're in, including the prince and whatever elder ancilla has been granted domain wherever you happen to be standing. Domain can also be a double-edged sword. A prince can grant a coterie that's troublesome an equally troublesome domain, and then blame them for whatever happens there. Thy domain is thine own concern. But the leash only gets tighter from here. Let's talk about the tradition of progeny. Thou shalt only sire another with the permission of thine elder. If thou createst another without thine elder's leave, both thou and thy progeny shall be slain. Okay, so you can't go around creating too many vampires. Fine. However, who's given control of that? Thine elder. Well, the default assumption in all the traditions, whenever there is a reference to thine elder or the elder, it's always the prince concentrating yet more power in that urban tyrant's hands. And since everything is done with permission of thine elder, it means that this is a carrot that the prince can dangle in front of vampires and limit or expand their power by limiting or expanding their brood. If I like you, if I think that you're going to teach your child or to be supportive of my agenda, or you're going to use those childer in order to reinforce my rule, I give you the right of progeny. If I think that you're not going to support me, you're not going to have any kids on my watch. Princes can make the right of progeny extremely hard to get, and given the frequent vampiric desire to create more of their kind, it's an easy way to get compliance. It's also an easy way to punish anarchs who don't necessarily respect the right of progeny and create childer much more frequently. Of course, creating kids comes with yet another group of chains and responsibilities, and that brings in the tradition of accounting. The fourth tradition, accounting. Those thou create are thine own childer. Until thy progeny shall be released, thou shalt command them in all things. Their sins are thine to endure. Quite a double-edged sword. First off, those you create are your kids. You're responsible for them. Reasonable rule, right? Well, not as written. Until your progeny is released, you shall command them in all things, which means your childer are completely subservient to you, and you only were allowed to create them if the prince liked you already, or you had pulled enough strings in order to get the right of progeny. So you're already a loyalist, and now you have absolute control of this new vampire. And then there's the entire idea of being released. Who determines when you're released? Well, in some domains, it is simply your sire saying you're released. But in many domains, you can only be released with the permission of the prince, which means the prince has to think that you're a valid and valuable member of the Camarilla now, a process which can take decades of servitude to your sire and by proxy to the prince. And then there's that third sentence, their sins are thine to endure. That means that if your childer screws up, no matter how minorly, you can be held responsible for it as if you were them. Therefore, as long as you have unreleased childer, you better be on your best behavior, you better be in the good graces of the prince, and boy howdy, your childer better behave themselves. So isn't it great? You've been created as a new vampire, and now you're practically in servitude to your sire until the prince says you are an acceptable member of their secret society, and also both you and your sire can be punished for it? Huh. Great immortality starting off, huh? But don't worry, if that doesn't hammer home who's actually in charge enough, there's always the last two traditions. Let's start off with number 5, the tradition of hospitality. Honor another's domain. When thou comest to a foreign city, thou shalt present thyself to one who ruleth there. Without thy word of acceptance, thou art nothing. Well, that's a threat if I ever heard one. In other words, you should honor people's domain. And who has the domain over the city again? Ah, yes, the prince, and the one who ruleth there. So, if you ever come into a city, you have to go and present yourself to the prince and say hi. And if they don't accept you, you're not protected by any of the traditions and laws of the Camarilla. In other words, it's ostensibly a manner of population control for a city, but ultimately it's a way of the prince keeping the mix of the city to be something they like. So even if you don't like where you live, even if you want to go live underneath another prince or go to another city or escape the tyranny of one prince, you have to go to another prince and kowtow to them. Everything goes back to the prince being in charge, the prince being a petty tyrant, and the prince being the urban Napoleon that he's meant to be. Oh, and what's the most important law of the Camarilla that you're not protected by without the word of acceptance? Oh, right, the sixth tradition, destruction. The sixth tradition, destruction. Thou art forbidden to destroy another of their own kind. The right of destruction belongeth only to thine elder. Only the eldest among thee shall call the blood hunt. In other words, who gets to kill who? Ostensibly, this is the greatest protection that the Camarilla can offer. You are not to be killed by other vampires, especially Camarilla vampires, without the permission of the prince. You'll notice there's not a mention of due process in there, though. The right of destruction belongeth to thine elder. The elder, of course, being assumed to be the prince in this case, and the eldest among thee also assumed to be the prince. So, the prince has the right to kill anyone for any reason they deem fit. Whether it's for a breach of the Masquerade, or whether it's stepping on their toe in Elysium, you can be eliminated just with a brush of the prince's hand. You have no protection from their power, and they can use it at will. So, it's probably best for you to not make it politically expedient to hasten your mortal coil being offed. But ultimately, this is the stick which goes with all these carrots like domain and progeny. If the prince and the Camarilla is done with you, they can kill you. That's it. They are given the right to by the sixth tradition. This tradition also enshrines the blood hunt, the bloody manhunt across the entire domain, in which your soul is forfeit and you can be diablerized legally, just to make it even more enticing for members of the Camarilla to hunt you down and kill you on behalf of the prince. All of these rules, all of these six traditions seem reasonable to begin with. Masquerade, don't tell people about vampires. Domain, don't mess around with other people's turf. Progeny, don't create too many kids. Accounting, if you create a kid, you can't just use them as a foot soldier. Hospitality, don't go tramping around in other people's domain, and make sure that there's not too many vampires coming to one city at once. Destruction, don't kill each other without reason. But there's all these little loopholes. There's all these little things that have been added to make it worse. Now, defenders of the Camarilla will point out they are six enduring rules, some of which go back to aeons and aeons. But the fact of the matter is that the way they're used in the modern Knights is to control and render subservient neonates and others to the prince and the elders. And that is how they've always been used since the formation of the Camarilla. I hope this gives you more insight into Vampire the Masquerade and how the politics of Vampire the Masquerade work, and how various vampires and princes use the traditions and use the politics of vampire in order to control and manipulate situations. So you can be a better storyteller and you can be a better player of Vampire the Masquerade. If you like this sort of content, this is my first long form video on it, and I would appreciate you liking and subscribing. Thank you, and have happy storytelling.